Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you for being here. We've got a great turnout. I think we've got a special event that you'll really enjoy, and it's a pleasure for me to be here as well. Before we begin, I would like to pay a special recognition. We have at least 2 World War II veterans that are in this room with us today. Ralph, Carl in the back, would any other World War II veterans please?
My uncle.
Mike, please stand up. Please, all World War II veterans. Leno here? Mike, what branch of the service? What branch of the service? Army?
Army engineers.
Army engineers. That's okay, they told us. And Carl Latore, Carl, stand up again. Carl, World War II veteran, United States Navy, was on board the USS Shangri-La, which was a large, an Essex-style aircraft carrier, and literally was in Tokyo Bay and witnessed from the decks of his ship the Japanese signing of the surrender on the USS Missouri. So, a real witness to history that we have here in this room. I would now like to ask all veterans who served, please stand. We'd like to give you special recognition as well. All veterans, any era. Thank you so much. And I'd like everyone to stand at this time. And Carl, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And also, I do want to acknowledge today is a special day, the 10th of November. I understand I have some Marines in the house. Yeah. Stand. It's their birthday. We got to wish you happy birthday. I don't know offhand I should. How many years?
244.
244 years. And I only think it appropriate to let you know that the Marine Corps was established in a drinking establishment, Tun's Tavern in Philadelphia, and they carry on that tradition to this very day. So thank you, gentlemen and ladies. I want to let you know the official record states, and this is right from U.S. Navy, the official records, the most intensely sustained combat operations ever fought by an aircraft carrier was completed by Air Group 40 and its carrier, the USS Swanee. That's a direct quote. The Air Group operated through 82 days of almost incessant combat. This was during the Okinawa campaign. Its pilots averaged 75 missions each. And in the thick of that combat, often flying in those combat missions, shooting vital aerial reconnaissance photos, was our guest, here with us today. Give him a round of applause, Ralph Triggiano. It's a handsome young guy. A little bit about Ralph. He was born in Chicago, grew up in the Little Italy section, the legendary Taylor Street, Taylor and Peoria, to be exact.
Yeah.
And grew up in a typical loving Italian family, surrounded by his maternal grandparents, his aunts, uncles. He hung out at the Hall House in his youth, where he boxed, he danced, he played softball, dreamt of becoming a photographer. He graduated from Guardian Angel Grade School, went to St. Patrick's Academy, the class of 1942. It's a good year.
Very good year.
And was working as a copy boy for the Chicago Times when he was drafted in 1943. Now, I mentioned earlier, class of 1942. There were 83 young men in that class. How many served in the military? Any idea? I would venture to say nearly all of them.
Yeah, I think so. I believe so.
And when you were drafted, you managed to get into the Navy because of your love of photography. And you mentioned to me your Uncle Mickey.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about him. That's not Uncle Mickey, incidentally. I think you were, what was going on that picture was taken? Do you remember? I think he had a hot date, although he looks a little young. Age 7.
My uncle had every influence on it.
And that was
Mickey Rito. He was a photographer for the Times for over 50 years. And he took the sports picture of the year at a Bear game with Sammy Baugh. It was crying on the bench, and it made the picture of the year in sports. It was in the 40s. And he had a great career photographing a famous famous picture for the Sox who shot his leg off with the Texas. And we've covered the Johnstown flood, and
he had a big influence on your decision that you wanted to follow his career and be a photographer.
He actually got me into the Times.
Well, when you graduated from high school,
correct.
That was your first job.
And the people that were copy boys were from Northwestern and Harvard, and
so you had some pull.
Yeah,
I thought you was from Taylor Street.
That's exactly. Truthfully, that's the only reason. Otherwise, they'd have picked somebody with, a higher education. But unfortunately, I was drafted.
Well, I was going to say the position didn't last too long. You
No.
graduated from high school in '42.
About 10 months, yeah.
And in 1943, you were drafted.
Correct.
And because of your love of photography, you managed to get into the Navy, completed basic training up here at Great Lakes,
Correct.
Aerial photography training down in Pensacola, Florida.
Correct.
I know that had to be nice duty.
Yeah, it was great duty. It was hot.
And then from there, went to complete additional classes at the Photo Science Library in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And from there, you were assigned to Air Group 40 aboard the USS Sewanee, which was an escort carrier.
Correct.
That was bound for the Pacific and truly into the teeth of battle. As an aerial reconnaissance photographer, your job was to map out enemy positions, providing crucial intel that really helped turn the tide of the war against the Japanese. You guys were the eyes and ears of the fleet.
Correct.
Tell us what you did as a recon photographer. What were some of your duties?
Well, if one of them is when you're mapping, say you go east and west, you turn around and take a portion of that map and converge and turn around. And I had to be careful with the tripper to be on, on the ball all the time. And this brought this. The camera was already in the bed of the plane.
So you were the one that was operating the shutter.
Exactly.
And it was kind of a grid pattern that the
Correct.
pilots flew.
And then you printed all of that, and you converged all these separate photos into one map.
And then I understand that you were involved in some pretty important missions over Guam, also the Philippines.
Yeah. At Guam, I took quite a few with an aerial camera, and got it to the admiral in a different fashion. You put them in a K-Pock and just throw them in the ocean, and a launch would come and pick it up And that was the extent of it. I never got any information on
Yeah.
how,
You know, we think of the
never got any complaints.
We think of the technology. I'm just amazed, you know, with satellites and instant communications and technology. I mean, you can be over in Afghanistan and be on the phone with your family back here, and they're throwing, you know, a K-pop case into the ocean and hoping somebody on a launch comes by and can find the thing, pick it up, and get it to the admiral.
Yeah.
I also understand that you sometimes got the dander up with some of the pilots that were flying you because you kept on saying, take me down closer, take me down closer,
Yeah.
take me down a little lower,
Yeah.
which tended to subject you guys to some anti-aircraft fire
Yeah.
from the local Japanese
Quite a
garrison.
bit. Quite a bit. You could see it. Thank God. I don't know if they had these proximity bombs. They must have had them. That if they get close enough to the plane, there's no reason to hit the plane. They'll just explode.
Well, they'd set the fuse on those things and
Yeah.
they'd shoot them out and they'd explode,
Yeah.
you know, depending on the
It
altitude.
was quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I was proud of that, some of the work I did there, because I came back with maybe 100, 150 planes on the ground, but a lot of them were mock-ups
Right.
made of wood.
And that was
So-
to fool you guys.
Yeah, correct.
So maybe they had only 20 airplanes, but they had another 100 mock-ups.
Maybe.
And you thought you had half the Japanese Air Force to tangle
Yeah.
with.
Well, after I developed them, I gave them to the chief petty officer, and I never heard, that's the end of it. I never heard any, no complaints.
You know, one of the things I'm amazed at, and I went back, and if you take a look at the faces of the Air Wing, the flight group, the guys that were operations,
You want me to hold that?
boy,
Yeah. Oh,
these were really some young men.
Okay.
Most of these guys were right out of high school, maybe a year or two of college, and in fact, I was reading in some of the records that I was looking at about the crew of the Swanee, and particularly Air Group 40. Of all the guys pictured in this in these two photos, you know, most of them couldn't even vote in the presidential election
Correct.
for 1944. They weren't old enough.
couldn't drink.
Couldn't drink. But I think you guys got around that. We'll talk to that later. Some of those laughable, lovable days on Liberty.
Yeah.
But couldn't drink, couldn't vote in the presidential election. In fact, there were two old men in the unit, and they were both photo reconnaissance officers. And they hit the ripe old age of 30 years old.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Correct.
it's really a testament to you guys who were basically 2 and 3 years prior to this, a bunch of high school kids running around having a good time.
Yeah.
And were able to go through this training and complete the mission and just do some remarkable things for your youth. So, again, I just sometimes marvel at the age of some of these young men in these photos.
Well, some of those pilots were my age,
Yeah,
and maybe younger. Oh, and even younger.
and you were 19, 20 at the time?
Yeah. Yeah. I had, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I had this pilot, he was my age, and we did a practice run in Florida over the Everglades there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was open cockpit. So he's forward.
That in itself is amazing. Open cockpit.
So I'm in the back of him, and we got the intercom, and I'm practicing. I'm shooting either with a movie camera or a 4x5 still camera. And he says, "I get ready to jump." Okay. I get on the seat, and there's a ring for a Torque machine gun. There's no machine gun. And I'm there rocking, and he looks at me, and he yells, get down, get down." He was only kidding. When we landed, I had a few words for him.
Well, I was going to ask you, I noticed in one of those early pictures, you're climbing into the airplane and you had a parachute on. Did you ever use that thing?
No, and a few times I flew without it.
So you're stationed on board the USS Swanee. You're with this air group, and the Swanee was really a smaller carrier, an escort carrier, little
Yeah.
500 feet in length, home to about 900 men,
Yeah.
and 25 aircraft. You traveled in a group with 3 other carriers,
Correct.
a battle group. Planes were literally, because the deck was so small, planes were literally catapulted into the air. When they returned, they tallied up enemy aircrafts and ships that were destroyed during their missions. And we've got a picture of that. Some of the action on board, anti-aircraft sight.
Yeah.
This is the picture. Explain those. What are all of those? What do they represent?
Those were the pilots that shot down planes, from what I remember.
So each one of these represented a plane that the pilot shot
Yeah.
down. And
Yeah.
this looks like it might have been a ship or a submarine that he destroyed as well?
Well, maybe not destroyed, but did damage to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they used to keep individual tallies.
Yeah.
Now, in typical fighter pilot fashion, you were not involved in dogfighters, but your job was still pretty risky. Tell us about the number of photographers that you guys had on each ship, and tell us the difference between a photographer like yours and somebody that was striking for that rate.
Oh, well, we had 7 photographers, and we must have had 4, 5, 6, and counting people that are trying to become photographers on the ship. And the reason you had so many photographers because they were killed like pilots, and you always needed an overabundance of photographers and people learning to do the work, because the photographers throughout the whole war all over were up there with the people that were most likely to die quickly. And
you were one of those photographers.
yeah. Luckily, none of our people were killed, and I never heard of anybody in our group of our 4 ships that were killed as photographers. Maybe on board with these, because we were the only ones that were getting these suicides. Might have been some photographers, killed while they were on board, but I never heard of it. No. Yeah.
Well, in addition to combat missions, there were plenty of other hazards that you and crew members faced. During the Battle of the Leyte Gulf, the USS Swanee survived not 1, but 2 direct hits from Japanese kamikaze planes.
Correct.
And you guys were a high priority target, being an aircraft carrier. So they were all gunning for you. And there were plenty of other perils when the ship wasn't under direct assault, pilots returning from missions. We've got some pictures that you took here with their aircraft, in many instances, riddled with bullet holes, flak that they caught over a target. But they look pretty happy, and I would be too, to make it back.
Exactly. Very happy.
in an airplane like that.
Yeah.
There was very little margin for error. I mean, even takeoff and landings on an aircraft carrier could be perilous.
Very.
Planes often crashing, plummeting into the sea. And you happen to be perhaps, right place at the right time, right place at the wrong time. There's a picture you took. Again, these are just some of the day-to-day occurrences.
Yeah.
Launching an aircraft off a carrier. Obviously, there's a picture of a casualty on the deck. I'm assuming from that picture, do you recall, was he a member of the crew on deck that was hit by that plane coming in?
Yeah. Yes, he was. Yeah. That crash, I think even the pilot was killed.
Mm-hmm.
I think some bomb exploded inside and did all that damage. And the problem of these rockets that they had, once in a while, when they'd land abruptly, the rockets would fly, 2 or 3 of them across the deck. We're just lucky they never exploded.
Well, here's a picture here, and you actually photographed this. Apparently, this was one of the planes that also was coming in for a landing when that rocket fell off.
Yeah.
And fortunately, it didn't detonate.
Right, correct. It didn't go off.
His son Mark talked to me about this picture, and he said, when I was a kid, I found that picture, and I asked my dad, what happened here? And he just explained what he did to us, and he said, you know, had that rocket gone off, I wouldn't be here, and neither would you. So, you know, I want you also to talk a little bit about the kamikaze attacks, but before I even ask you that, I just want to point out that this was such a real threat, that this thing could have exploded. And in fact, about 22 years later, off the coast of Vietnam, different war, different time, the USS Forrestal had a very similar incident where a rocket prematurely detonated on deck, and that rocket hit another plane that was in line waiting to take off. That plane happened to be piloted by, he wasn't a senator then, but John McCain.
Wow.
And it hit McCain's plane, and an explosion ensued, and there were 134 sailors that were killed in the fire and subsequent explosions. So, I don't know if you know how lucky you were.
I knew I was lucky.
Because this was a real threat that you guys faced on a daily basis. Tell us a little bit about the kamikazes. What was that like?
This Lady Gulf, were encircled by, I think it was the last gasp of the Japanese Navy. And what we gathered from the north, their battleships were coming, and from the east, they had cruisers and destroyers ringing us into the shore. But there was no way we could escape. But luckily, our ships were countering all this throughout the inner rim. And I'll never forget it. Because I was next to the radar shack, and the fellow was real tight with good friends. He said, there's 400 bogies coming in. The bogies are planes that are not identified. And our guys were shooting them down like flies. And October 25th, we got the first suicide plane, and it came down and hit. I was about 75 feet away from it. The bomb didn't explode there. It went into the bowels of the carrier and exploded. It killed many, many people down there. And the ship was repaired in 90 minutes, and we were ready to operate. In an hour and a half, they covered that deck. So we got a respite. The next day, nothing. October 27th, another kamikaze hit us forward elevator. That elevator was a great big elevator for the planes that come down. One elevator would bring the planes in the stern down, and they would repair them. They would bring them up in the forward elevator. And once they blew up that elevator, we were out of action. And the word I gathered was that the admiral told our captain he wanted him to stay for firepower. And we had 2 5-inch guns that were about 300 years old. And we had these pea shooters, they're 40 millimeter, 20 millimeter, no 5-inch. And our captain relayed to the admiral, if you don't give us time to relieve. I'm going to abandon ship. And the admiral told them, well, you're relieved. And that's how we got out of there, because the reason we got out of that area is because all our pilots were destroying this whole armada of the Japanese Navy. Otherwise, we'd have probably been sunk like many, there were Kaiser ships, we call. They were,
That was a manufacturer.
yeah, Kaiser. We call them a floating coffins. They weren't well built. And we lost many of those also in that battle. And that's about it on that.
Well, as I said, there were many, many other perils faced in addition to kamikazes and the actual combat. And again, right place at the wrong time, perhaps. These are pictures that you took when a pilot was coming in for a landing. You missed the deck entirely, you veered into the sea. And you were able to capture, literally, I think we take it from here. He's coming in for the landing, and as you can see, he missed the deck, wound up in the drink, and was picked up eventually by a dinghy that you guys had that would follow the aircraft carrier during launching and recovery operations. You had no helicopters.
No.
But you told me a funny story about this particular pilot, that he was a bit of a hot dog.
Yeah.
And tell us what happened when he crashed into the drink.
Go ahead.
And he survived. No, you tell it, because I think you tell it better than I do. But he crashed into the sea, and while he was waiting to be picked up.
Go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead.
You want to hear the story again? All right, the story, as you told me, is that he was a real bit of a hot dog, and as he's unstrapping and unhooking himself from in the cockpit, and the little dinghy is coming along to rescue him, he gets out of the cockpit, stands up, stands on the wing, and decides to do a perfect swan dive into the ocean. You know, the entire crew of the Swanee is watching him in this dramatic rescue operation.
You'd think it was in California.
And he thought he was diving off the pier in Santa Monica.
You're right.
But these are just some remarkable photos, and again, I'd like to run through them again. You were just at the right place at the right time. I think on this one, you can actually see the tail hook.
Yeah.
On that plane coming down. Tell us about that and what the tail hook was used for, and how these planes, they called it a controlled crash. Tell us what these tail hooks were used for. Here are the arresting wires. You can even see the wires going across.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, please.
Well, when you approach to land, you have an officer with two
Paddles.
paddles. They were like ping pong paddles, and he'd tell you up and down, or this way or that way, all hand signals. And then when you got to the point to land, he shut you down and you would land. Well, sometime this pilot, his plane was not correctly landing, and that's the reason it kept bouncing and bouncing. He couldn't have a control of it, and he flipped over the side that way because the hook, this cable is very thick, and
Another great picture.
they're laying flat onto the surface, not flat but upright, so the hook in the back of the plane, there's a hook that hooks the cable, and they stop. Once in a while, the hook would bounce and not engage the cable. Not in this case, though. This case, the pilot he didn't land completely the way he should have. And that's the reason he went over the side. But in many instances, a pilot would come in perfectly, and the blessed hook would not engage the cable, and it would bounce, and we had these cables upright where they would hit to stop the planes. And naturally, they'd crash and they'd have to be repaired. But it happened many times. We had a great record. I think we had like 1,200 landings and not a flat tire or not any injuries. It was a great accomplishment by these pilots, all young pilots, most of them. Some were old, 30 years old, you know, real old geezers.
In fact, do you recall, who was the oldest man on the ship, the captain? And he probably was in his 30s.
He might have been in his 40s, 45. He was probably the oldest. And we had a lieutenant commander that looked like a bulldog. He looked like he was about 45 too, rough guy. The captain, two captains we had were great, really great. The captain, during the kamikazes, wound up with lead in his behind. And they put him down with down below with the ordinary sailors. And this one sailor was from Frisco. I don't want to mention his name. He was moaning like an old lady, and the captain said, "Please take care of him first. I'll wait." So it was one heck of a guy, that captain. I don't remember his name. He was a great guy. I talked to him once. And this lieutenant commander got in front of him, and he looked me in the face. "You got something to do, sailor?" "Yes, sir." Made about face, and I was gone.
Well, I want to talk a little bit and ask you some questions, life on board ship. In between fierce and fanatic bouts with combat, you guys did enjoy some periods of relative calm.
Correct.
Of course, maintenance of the ship and all the equipment was continual, but there was some leisure time. I told you he was from Taylor Street. He occupied himself playing cards. I don't know, I'm looking for my father in that picture. If there were a pair of dice, he'd be there. But you guys played cards. This one I liked, the mock fisticuffs. Although I understand you did a little boxing.
Some, yeah.
And also the birthday cake. It was a party organized by your pals. They baked a cake. 26th of June, 1945. Happy birthday, Trig. And also, you guys had a special visit from Martha O'Driscoll?
Yeah. She was with Bob Hope on his last trip in that area.
Well, there was a little bit of a story about Martha. Apparently she had eyes for you at the time. I don't know if you want to go into that.
No.
Right, you don't have to go into that. But apparently she took a liking to that, that suave, debonair 7-year-old kid with that hat and that suit. It's pretty cool 19, 20-year-old as well.
Yeah,
so
it's a nice young lady.
Nice young lady. No complaints. Nice, no complaints, right?
No complaints.
No complaints. But apparently she was perhaps paying a little more attention to you than some of the senior officers on board, and one of the officers kind of nipped that in the bud.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Well, I couldn't get off the ship anyway.
So tell us also, I think this is a heck of a tribute. I got to go back to that cake. Tell us about the birthday party. I mean, how did that come about?
a young fella my age from Milwaukee. We played chess all the time, and he was so much better than I was, and we were very good friends. And he worked as in the cooking department, but it wasn't. I didn't know where they were located, but they would do special orders, I guess, for the officers. You know, chops and steaks and so forth. And he said, "Let me make you a little cake." And holy mackerel! When I saw the cake, I couldn't believe it. And that's how that came about. Otherwise, it was very unusual that anybody had a birthday cake. It just
Well, I was going to say
just one of those things.
that's a heck of a tribute to you from your shipmates
Yeah.
to actually have that experience. I had a special request. Somebody wanted to know, was the band any good?
Oh, they were terrific. They were really good.
Now, these were guys that were crew members of the ship,
Yeah,
correct?
correct. Yeah. And they had a good conductor. And this was taken, let's see. It was a gathering of, something from New Orleans. If people were dressed like Mardi Gras. And guys were dressed like ladies and dancing. And it was sort of, if anybody's seen Stalag 13, is that the movie?
17, when they dressed up like ladies.
Correct,
And
yeah.
they were
Was that
dancing.
17? Yeah. I'm watching Hogan's Heroes. 17. And it was exactly what that was. It was one guy, they strapped him into some small mattresses, and he was dancing with somebody else who was really crazy looking, and we had a great time. And that went on.
No women.
No,
No women on Navy ships in those days.
no, not one lady. But the way I say it, a lot of guys would dress up ladylike, and everybody had a great time laughing and joking, and that was that went on for one day. We once in a while we would have a movie of World War II movies and some of the old Clark Gable movies. It's once in a while when you were way out of harm's way, you know, because we did get to some crazy places. There's a place, Esperito. I was there for 4 hours on a beautiful black sand.
So you were able to get off ship and
For
actually...
4 hours, yeah. But it was far off of Australia. I don't know why we were there or what. And that was very unusual. But once in a while, you'd get off. I think we got off at a place called Halmahera, and actually met some really Aboriginal people. All just the males, and just for a
So you didn't even meet any native girls this whole, this whole time. These were all...
forget that. That would never happen.
Well, we were talking about dressing up, and this is just a great picture. Rite of passage. Anyone that's ever sailed, been on a Navy ship, this is a ritual that dates back centuries. And I think literally it goes back about 400 years. And the first time a group of sailors crosses the equator, the entire crew turns out to celebrate. And the neophytes, the rookies, are pollywogs.
Pollywogs.
And after they prove their seaworthiness and pay honor to King Neptune and his crew, they are transformed into shellbacks. And your initiation into the Purple Order of Porpoises took place
Correct.
on the vernal equinox,
Yeah.
which was a rare event in maritime history. In fact, it had last occurred some 300 years
Yeah.
before. So this was truly a special ceremony, complete with, I guess we'll call it hazings.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Initiations.
Definitely.
As overseen by King Neptune and his crew. Well, I tell you, dressed to kill. And, some of the preparations for the big day. And a couple of shellbacks. Tell us a little bit about your experiences and what they put the pollywogs through, and what they put you through.
Yeah. First of all, the pilots being young people, they were as feisty as anyone, and they were fighting, fisticuffs, punching and kicking, and to get these pilots to be initiated. And the way I got initiated, I was in the photo lab, and the guy came over and he said, "I'm going to cut your hair." I said, "Cut it." So he cut it down the middle, and you couldn't see it. I had a picture taken because I got such a mop of hair, you couldn't see him. But when I got on deck, they had all these old salts with sort of clubs, not wood, or they were made of bags, but they were hard. They hit the guys with them, and they had this great big pool of purple stuff. They were slathering everybody with them, and the guy wouldn't know they'd jam it in his mouth. And
I'm not going to ask, or I will ask, what was that purple stuff?
Only
Any
God
idea?
knows.
Who knows? Whatever they could throw together.
Yeah, exactly.
But it wasn't good.
No, not really. And I figured if I stay behind with all these people getting whacked and hammered and all this terrible stuff at it, and they had a cattle prod. So by the time my time came, I started running like mad, and some guy stopped me and grabbed me. And I got pummeled, and I didn't get any of that purple stuff. And this guy with the prodder was coming with the 2 prongs. I said, "If you touch me, I'm going to kill you." And he backed off. He could see I was really, intent on what I was saying. And that was about everything that happened. It took quite a bit of the day to doing.
And this still goes on to this very day in the
Yeah.
Navy. It's a tradition. In fact,
Oh, yeah.
gentleman right here was in the Marine Corps, was on a ship, crossed the equator, was it 1980?
1980. On
1980.
Kenya.
And basically went through
Same thing.
the same kind of ceremony.
They hit us. What they had is they had water hoses, and they cut them in sections, and they would put electric tape and use it as a handle and hit you with the water hose. That was part of their. But it was always fun.
Absolutely.
Oh, wow.
So you mentioned it earlier. You also got some shore leave, and while you certainly spent the vast majority of your time at sea, you did get to see quite a bit of the world. The ship made stops in the Gilbert Islands, the Marshalls, the Marianas, New Guinea, the Philippines, as well as Tokyo, Nagasaki,
Correct.
and Okinawa.
Yeah.
And you talked a little bit about waiting in line for a couple of beers on Okinawa, and also seeing Bob Hope and Francis Langford perform in the Philippines.
Correct. Yeah.
And as we kind of run the Okinawa Press Club, as we kind of run through these pictures, I think that's the beer line. Let me ask, do you have a favorite story about any particular shore leave? There's Bob Hope and Francis Langford.
We were
Anything that you could talk about.
in Tokyo. As your luck is, we landed in Tokyo and were walking around, and we didn't know it was the greatest holiday, and everything was shut down. So a Japanese person, a man, he had this bottle with him. So I approached the guy, maybe to buy the bottle, and he ran off And I kept yelling, stop, stop, but he didn't understand me. He turned around the corner and never saw him again. But there was nowhere to eat, no bars or anything. And it was just sort of moseying on. I took a few
This was in
pictures.
Tokyo, yeah.
I took some nice pictures of the seashore there, and we were uphill, and some of my favorites around Tokyo there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And also, I think this picture here, tell us a little bit about the beer line.
Oh my.
I think you only got a couple of beers. You had
Yeah.
to wait in line half the day, half your
Yeah.
time on shore was spent
Yeah.
waiting in line.
This was in Tacloban, in the Philippines. And you're supposed to get 4 bottles of near beer, 3-2. And I wound up with 2, and somebody else wound up with my 2. And I think we were about 10,000 guys on shore. And you couldn't move because they had a perimeter of Marines with guns, and you couldn't go near there because they'd probably shoot in the sand to scare you off, but nobody did.
Well, I see
Nobody-
some of them are wearing weapons, and this here and
Yeah.
here, and they were guarding the beer.
Yep,
Ones with the beer.
That's right.
correct.
That's right. And this is a great shot here. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to see Bob Hope and Francis Langford live.
Yeah, it was really wonderful because Hope with his jokes could really ring your bell, you know, everybody laughing. And she was a good singer, and she was, you know, she backed them up.
Yeah.
Very, very good. Very good entertainer. And she had her own radio show at one time, I think, later. But Hope was, everybody's crazy about her.
They had a big crowd.
Oh, yeah. Thousands and thousands of people. That, you know, with great morale to see, you know, Hope and her, Francis Langford. She's a good singer of pop tunes at that time. Yeah. That was his last show.
That was toward the end of the war, the show.
Yeah. But the war was still on. And after that, he'd gone back to the States. Yeah.
But she was no Martha O'Driscoll.
No. No.
You guys had some sports activities as well on board.
Yeah.
Did you do any boxing in the Navy at all?
Yeah, I did up at the Great Lakes and on the ship.
Smokers?
Yeah, I had 2-3 fights, and my last fight was a bad one. The guy was just really good. He outclassed me something awful. Yeah. But I stayed in there.
And you had mentioned earlier this was in the Aborigine
Yeah.
picture, one of the
Yeah.
natives that you
Correct.
experienced.
That type of person, yeah. They came in, they didn't never come alone. They always had 6, 7, 8 people with them, all males. And we only made in contact with them for a matter of hours because the officers didn't want us to, you never knew about these people.
Right.
They might turn on you. So we gave them some stuff. I forgot what we gave them. And they gave us some. In fact, I remember one great big, it looked like a grapefruit, but it wasn't. It was good tasting, tremendously big seeds in. I've never seen them before. Maybe they just grew in that area.
And once the war actually ended, you were able to take shore leave in Japan. And you visited Nagasaki only 2 weeks after the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And you not only visited Nagasaki by flying over and doing recon photos, such as this one, but you also witnessed it on the ground,
Yeah,
firsthand?
we all we're all in a truck, and thank God we didn't walk because that was all toxic. And once in a while you would see a Japanese person, and one Japanese person that I recall, he had a mule with him, and he had shoes on, the leather shoes, like cloven. I'd never seen that. I never forgot it. I don't know what he was walking around in this awful spot. They go so desperate. I guess they're looking for something. I don't know.
And tell us again, what were your impressions? I want to go back to this aerial shot. What were your impressions flying over? I mean, just 2 weeks after the atomic bomb had been dropped. What were your impressions? What was the color? This is black and white. What was the color? Do you recall?
It was
Was it all gray?
Yeah.
Was it ashen?
sort of lead type of coloring, and it was horrible, really, to see it, and and the thing that impressed me was the way everything was flattened, except for sort of a silo type or smoke stacks. That was all that remained, all over the place, but everything else was flat.
Do you recall when you were on the ground the smell at all? Was there any smell?
No, there was no smell. Not at all. Not at all.
So just total devastation.
Yeah,
And this is one of the hospital ships.
yeah.
And do you recall where this was taken? Was this in Tokyo Bay?
No, this was in. I think this is in Nagasaki also.
Also?
Yeah. And
These are the homeless.
yeah, and there was well, we were in that. Luckily, we were in that bay, because a typhoon came along, and it was so bad. It knocked some of these small boats up into the mountains, and they're stuck there forever. Really strange. It was a big harbor, and you could feel the results of the tornado, but we were safe in the harbor. Yeah.
So the war ended. You came back to the United States. You got discharged from the Navy
Correct.
in 1946.
Correct.
Came back to Chicago.
Yeah.
Got a job.
Yeah.
Got married.
Yep.
Had kids.
Wonderful family.
Wonderful family, grandkids, and one great-grandchild.
Right.
What was your homecoming like after 3 years away from home and all of the combat that you saw? And again, in those days, there were no phone calls home from overseas, were there?
No, not
and,
really.
and a letter that you would write that might take a month or two to get an answer, to get to where it was going and to get an answer back.
Maybe, yeah.
So what was your homecoming like after 3 years away?
I live with Grandma. I'm raised with Grandma. And aunts and uncles. They, really ecstatic to see me back, all in one piece. And
Did they know you were coming, or did you surprise them?
they knew I was coming, but they didn't know which date. And when I got there, it was sort of a surprise in that way, in that respect. Yeah.
Did you arrive by train?
Yeah, I came by plane. Yeah.
By plane?
Yeah.
My father told me he took the streetcar home. and
He
to
did,
the
huh?
corner of Taylor and Damon and got off, and here he was. Did they meet you at the airport? I imagine in those days you flew into Midway. Or did
Yeah.
they meet you at the airport, or?
I had an uncle pick me up. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And one final question. What was your adjustment period like? Was it difficult for you to get back into the swing of things and to be out of the military and to be back home?
No.
Again, 3 years away and all the things that you saw?
Not at all. It didn't bother me at all. I just took it as natural just to come home and be there, and happy to be be back in Chicago.
Well, you made one statement, and it really struck a chord with me. You said you hate war,
Oh yeah.
but you have to fight for your country.
Oh, definitely.
And I think that's a real testimony, a real testament to you, to all the men and women of your generation, and all of the veterans here in this audience.
All of us.
And I want to thank you very much for being here today. I'll salute you and all the veterans here with us as well, because it's people like you, both men and women, that allow us to have the freedom to be able to have this program here and to live in this country as we do. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think he deserves a standing ovation as well. Now, I'd like to call Paul. Oh, well, yeah, we can do that if you're up to
A
it.
couple of questions, if anybody has. Questions from the audience.
Are you up to that? Does anybody have any questions?
Great, okay.
Yes, sir.